Think back to 2006. In the world of gaming, there was a lot going on. The 7th generation of gaming consoles were emerging as the 6th generation was closing out with outstanding titles like Rockstar's Bully, Activision's Call of Duty 3, Nintendo's Twilight Princess, and Bethesda's Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Among these titans of classic games, and the whirlwind of them all being shuffled around between the PS2, PS3, PC, Xbox, Xbox 360, and Nintendo Wii, you couldn't be blamed too much for not noticing the hidden gem of Okami. Created by many of the genius minds who would later go on to make up the bulk of Platinum Games, Okami was a very charming action game and a PlayStation 2 exclusive that would round out the end of that system's major releases before pretty much every developer would switch focus to its successor and/or the Xbox 360. Okami's main character, Amaterasu, taking the form of a wolf, soars through a fabulous watercolor stylized world, defeating figures in Japanese folklore and restoring its fictionalized classic Japanese world, all while touching on and celebrating the themes and the mythology its world and characters come from. The entire game is presented with an outrageously beautiful cel-shaded look that complements the gameplay well, and traditional Japanese music that does the same. The gameplay was largely combat-focused, with lots of Zelda-esque exploration thrown in for good measure. As you might imagine, the wonderful tale of Okami would go on to review extremely well and receive lots of 8s, 9s, and even 10s from major review outlets. Okami was more than able to shine very brightly in its time, and still does today for many who enjoy this type of game. The game has seen ports to multiple systems, including the Wii, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and even the Nintendo Switch, all of which are regarded as excellent and serve as reminders that the game still has a place in the gaming space. Yet, oddly, Okami never got a sequel. But why is this? How could something as creative as Okami, with all of its accolades, still only be limited to one game? What the hell happened to Okami? While it is true that Okami did assert itself very quickly by earning a spot among other fine artistic games of its time like Shadow of the Colossus and Katamari Damacy, unlike those two games, however, it did not sell well at all, at least at first. This is likely due to the climate in which it was released. As we touched on before, Okami released in the middle of a tsunami of new tech and big, explosive, high-budget games showing off that tech. While Okami was no slouch in the technical department, it was perhaps outgunned in this regard, and would learn a very hard lesson that many games after and before would also need to learn: timing is everything. While the artistic and ethereal are always in demand to a point, 2006 was a time of graphical achievement, resolution hikes, and every big publisher seeing who can cram the most polygons into everyone's newfangled 1080p plasma screens. Probably not the best time to release a game about a watercolor wolf, at least if you were wanting to make money. The game also wasn't a perfect experience, with many reviewers mentioning some uneven difficulty spikes, long stretches of fairly boring and self-important dialogue, and the occasional technical hiccup, the latter of which would be mostly ironed out with the HD version of the game on PS3, and even more so with the current, more definitive version on PS4 and Xbox One that sports a nice sharp 4K image and a much smoother gameplay experience. For this, the HD version of the game was rewarded with fairly good sales for an older game, exceeding over 1 million sales by late 2019, bringing the total sales for all versions of Okami to nearly 3 million copies worldwide, which may not be insane in this day and age, but it's not bad, and many worse-selling games have gotten sequels since. Despite this, in the ensuing years after the original game's release, most of the focus for the IP was on a port to the Nintendo Wii. With Okami's unique paintbrush mechanic, it seemed like a really good fit, and Ready at Dawn was tasked with overseeing the port. This is where some trouble would come Okami's way, however. Reportedly, the original game assets given to Ready at Dawn from Capcom Japan were incomplete and insufficient. Even worse, after requesting old hard drives and computers to recover more assets of the game, Ready at Dawn was still unable to piece the game together as a typical port would be, and they ultimately had to pull their resources together to recreate some large chunks of the game from scratch. On top of that, they had to recode much of the game to change optimizations that were made for the PlayStation 2 to get it to run on the Wii. The game was delayed, but eventually would launch on the Wii in late 2008, but with some parts removed, much to the dismay of some of the original creators. Even still, this tumultuous and hampered version of the game did bring the experience to a much wider audience, and for that, the IP has added to its cult following considerably. Despite the Wii port of Okami taking a few hits here and there, it made the brand more relevant with the Nintendo crowd, and the sustained interest was a big part of the reason we got a successor in Okami Den in 2011 on the Nintendo DS. Although the phrase spiritual successor is often how this is described, the way the game looks, plays, and feels is much more like a direct sequel. The story even seems to acknowledge the previous game as you play the offspring of the original wolf, so I think it's more than fair to just call this a sequel. The DS was a perfect fit for the iconic brush mechanic, and Okami Den utilized it exactly how you would think it would, by letting you use your stylus to impact the combat and puzzle elements in real time. Despite running a little choppy at times, the game was pretty impressive for a handheld, and holds up pretty well even today. In some ways, it holds up even better than the original, as the dual-screen tech of the DS complements the gameplay ideas better than a typical controller most of the time. Okami Den was received quite well, but the handheld gaming community's attention was quickly stolen away by the emergence of the 3DS and PlayStation's Vita shortly after it launched. So it ultimately failed to make much of an impact. Interestingly, Capcom has held on tightly to the Okami IP, at times appearing to be considering a true sequel and then moving away from it for whatever reason. Most notably, in recent years, Capcom representatives have been going out of their way to mention in several interviews that they are always looking at so-called dormant properties, which immediately brings Okami to mind for many, especially now with the runaway successes of the new Resident Evil and Monster Hunter games. Capcom surely has the capital and the resources to invest in slightly riskier projects. Capcom surely has plenty of those to choose from, but who knows? Maybe among that treasure trove of IP, a somewhat artsy game about a brilliantly colorful wolf and her journey through Japanese folklore could find its way back onto the scene in a world that is now more ready for her than ever before. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to ensure you'll be notified when new videos go up.